Chapter 1. I used to think I was good at reading people. Years of living in a small city like Crestwood will do that to you. You start to notice patterns. Neighbors waving at the same time every morning. The mailman taking the same route. The clerk at the grocery store tapping her nails in the same rhythm on the counter. People are predictable, or at least I thought they were. It was a Wednesday evening when things stopped making sense. The store was nearly empty, humming with a low buzz of fluorescent lights. I was pushing a half-filled cart past the canned goods aisle, half distracted, when I noticed a man standing perfectly still at the far end. His cart was empty. He wasn't even pretending to shop. He was just staring down the aisle like he was waiting for something, or someone. At first, I thought he was just zoning out, but then he blinked. I swear to God, it wasn't a normal blink. His eyelids slid sideways, not up and down. Just for a split second, a thin, translucent film slipped across his eyes like a snake or a lizard. My stomach dropped. I froze, gripping the cart handle so hard my knuckles ached. I told myself I was seeing things. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the buzzing lights distorted the reflection. Anything but the alternative. He turned his head slowly, like he had heard my thoughts. His gaze locked onto mine. Those eyes weren't right. The pupils seemed too sharp, too narrow like vertical slits. His face was calm, too calm, but the longer I stared, the colder I felt. A trickle of sweat ran down my back, even though the air in the store was stale and dry. I forced myself to look away, tossed a random can into my cart, and hurried past him. Every step felt like it echoed, though the aisle was silent. I didn't dare glance back until I reached the checkout. When I finally did, he was gone. The cashier scanned my items without a word. She didn't even look at me, just stared blankly at her register like she was half asleep. I wanted to ask her if she'd seen the man, but the words stuck in my throat. On the drive home, I couldn't shake the feeling of his stare. The streets were unusually empty. The kind of quiet that feels staged, like the world is holding its breath. I pulled into my driveway and sat there for a long minute, gripping the steering wheel, trying to convince myself that I hadn't seen what I thought I'd seen. But when I finally got out of the car, I noticed something. Across the street, under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, someone was standing perfectly still, too far away to make out their face. Just a tall, thin silhouette, watching. I shut the door and hurried inside, bolting the lock behind me. That night, I dreamed of scales sliding under skin. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Dark. I didn't tell anyone about the man in the grocery store. Who would believe me? Hey, I saw someone blink sideways. Yeah, that would go over real well. People already thought I was a bit paranoid. Too much late-night coffee, too many weird articles bookmarked on my laptop. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more it gnawed at me. I caught myself replaying that moment in the aisle again and again. The eyes, the blink, the way he seemed to know I was watching him. Every detail sharpened until I started doubting whether I'd imagined it at all. That's when I stumbled into the forums. I don't even remember what I typed into the search bar. Something stupid, like man blinks sideways eyes like a lizard. The results were a mix of conspiracy blogs, grainy YouTube videos, and long threads filled with half-crazed theories. Normally, I would have clicked away, rolled my eyes, maybe even laughed. But after what I'd seen, it all felt different. One phrase kept coming up: the reptilians, ancient beings, hidden among us, masters of disguise. Some claimed they'd been here for centuries, ruling quietly behind the scenes. Politicians, celebrities, even neighbors. They could be anyone. Most of it read like nonsense. But every now and then I'd find a detail that hit too close to home. Descriptions of cold stares, of slitted pupils glimpsed in poor lighting. Mentions of strange deaths. People vanishing without explanation. That was how I met Harold. He wasn't online, at least not anymore. Someone on the forum mentioned an old crank who lived near Crestwood and had been talking about reptilians for years. Most laughed him off. One person said he was dangerous, but something told me I had to find him. It took 2 days of asking around and one awkward conversation with a gas station clerk before I got an address. A rundown boarding house near the edge of town. Harold opened the door before I even knocked. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. His eyes darted left and right, scanning the street. Before he yanked me inside, the hallway smelled of dust and mildew. The wallpaper peeled like shedding skin. I read about you," I stammered. "You know about them." His face tightened. "Keep your voice down." He led me into a cramped living room lit by a single lamp. Every surface was stacked with newspapers, magazines, and scribbled notebooks. The air felt thick, oppressive. "You've seen one," he said flatly. I swallowed. "At the store. His eyes." "Sideways," Harold finished for me. His voice was hoarse but steady. "The nictitating membrane. They can't always control it." I froze. The word, nictitating membrane, was too specific, too clinical. He wasn't just rambling. He knew what he was talking about. "They're here," Harold said, leaning forward. His breath smelled faintly of cigarettes. "Always have been. You think governments fall, wars happen, economies collapse because of human greed? No. It's them, pulling strings, feeding." "Feeding?" I whispered. He nodded slowly. "Not just on flesh, on fear, on obedience. They drain us in ways you can't imagine. And when someone gets too close to the truth," he drew a finger across his throat. I felt a chill crawl over my skin. "Why are you still alive then?" His lips curled into something between a smile and a grimace. "Because I'm careful. Because I blend in. And because," he hesitated, "because they like to watch me squirm. Makes them feel powerful." A floorboard creaked somewhere above us. Harold's head snapped up, eyes wide. For a second, I thought someone else was in the house, but the sound faded, and he exhaled shakily. "You need to leave," he said suddenly, standing. "They'll follow you if you stay here too long." I didn't argue. I hurried out, my heart thudding. The night air felt cold and damp against my skin. As I walked back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that Harold was right, that someone was already watching. The next morning, the news said Harold was dead. Heart attack in his sleep, they claimed. No foul play suspected. But I remembered the way he had looked over his shoulder, the fear in his eyes. And I knew he hadn't just died. They had silenced him. Chapter 3. A glimpse behind the mask. For 2 days after Harold's funeral, if you could call that shallow, wind-ruffled gathering a funeral, I slept with the curtains drawn and the lights on. I told myself it was precaution, a way to quiet the unease. Mostly it was denial. If I kept everything visible, if I could see into every corner of my apartment, maybe the world would stay ordinary. Ordinary didn't show up. On the third night, I took the late train downtown because my insomnia had become a thing I needed to manage with motion and other people. The carriage was nearly empty, the fluorescent strip lighting buzzing above like a hive of angry insects. I sat by the window and watched the city slide past, all amber street lamps and shuttered storefronts. Every stop we made, I expected him, the man from the grocery, to be waiting under the dim platform light, eyes catching mine. He wasn't there. What was there, though, was a woman with a stroller. She was young, late 20s maybe, with a tiredness in the crease of her mouth that said, single parent, long shifts, too little sleep. She wore a knitted scarf, and when she smiled at a child in the carriage, the warmth in her face was bright and entirely human. I relaxed a fraction. People like her were why I still believed in normal. Then the train lurched, and the lights flickered, and for the span of a single heartbeat, no longer, her skin seemed to ripple like water over stones. I blinked and everything was steady again. My heart hammered. The carriage smelled sudden and sharp, like chlorine and cold metal. I watched the woman's hand as she reached to tighten the strap of the stroller. Where the skin met the edge of her glove, something glossy caught the light, a strip of olive green, patterned like dried leaves. It was only a patch, no bigger than a thumbnail, but it shone like a scale. I told myself it was a shadow, a trick of light, maybe a sticker on the stroller. And then, for no reason I could explain, She lifted the baby to her chest and, with a quiet motion that should have been tender, pressed her cheek to the child's head. Her lips parted in a soft hum. When she drew back, her mouth had changed. It wasn't the shape so much as the texture. Her lips looked thin, tighter than they should have been, as if something beneath the skin tightened at the edges. The corners of her mouth curved, not a smile exactly, but a small, satisfied line. Her eyes, when they swept the carriage, held a coolness that made the hair on my arm stand up. The vertical slits of her pupils contracted in the fluorescent light, and for a second longer than any human reaction should have allowed, a forked shadow flicked at the corner of her lips, like the hint of a tongue. I did not move. If I made a sound, I thought she might know I'd seen. Harold's fingers across his throat flashed through my mind. They don't like to be exposed, his rasping voice had said. They silence the noise. They break the pattern. The woman rose at the next stop. Her movements were ordinary, folding the stroller, shifting her weight to the bag at her shoulder. But there was an economy to them that felt practiced, efficient in a way that unnerved me. As she stepped down to the platform, I saw another thing. The back of her head, where her hair parted, revealed a pale, patterned ridge of skin, subtle, almost invisible, a scale-like texture that vanished when she tucked her hair back. When she disappeared into the station corridor, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I sat frozen until the train rolled into the depot and emptied. On the escalator, I passed people who looked exactly the way people usually do. Bleary students, an elderly man with grocery bags, a girl scrolling through her phone. I wanted to tell someone anything, but the words were bizarre in my mouth. Someone might think I had lost it. Someone might call the police, and the police might look at me like I looked at a creep who insists a stranger blink sideways. I decided instead to follow. Not stalking, not malicious, just pulling at a thread. She had gotten off at the old mill stop, and I kept my distance, letting the crowd keep us separate. She walked briskly, head down, hugging the stroller with one hand and a plastic bag with the other. Her steps led her down a lane between two old brick warehouses, the kind of alleys that smelled of damp and oil and old newspapers. The streetlights were patchy here, letting shadow and light fight for dominance. Then she paused as if sensing something. She turned, slowly, deliberately, and looked directly at me. Ainvleets, cold flew through my chest. For a moment, I thought she would call out. Instead, she smiled that small, too precise smile and continued on. Her eyes, though, lingered, and I felt as if she'd parked a camera in the center of my skull. I should have retreated. I should have gone to the police. Instead, I stepped closer, enough to hear the rustle of fabric and the faint, wet sound of breathing that didn't belong to any human rhythm I knew. That's when she stopped and dropped the stroller's safety strap. The child inside coughed, a tiny, dry sound. The woman crouched without haste, as if following a practiced choreography, and reached in. As she tugged a blanket back, the child's arm flashed, pale and pink and very human. And then the arm twitched unnaturally, and the skin at the wrist split like old paper. A scale slid free. It was not a friendly thing to watch. The scale was small and curved and iridescent, catching the streetlight and reflecting it back like a burned coin. The woman's fingers were tender for a moment, almost reverent, as she peeled it away, and the child's crimson wrist beneath was raw but still breathing. My throat closed. I stumbled back, the sound of my foot on wet pavement loud enough to startle me. The woman's head snapped up, and in that instant she was all eyes and razor awareness. The human mask cracked at the corner of her mouth, and for a fraction of a second, a serrated line of teeth gleamed. She did not shriek. She only smiled, a slow, predatory smile, and the air around her seemed to cool so dramatically, my breath clouded white. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Not a whisper, not a shout, but a cold, measured tone that carried exactly to me. I ran. The alley swallowed my footsteps. Behind me, the sound of the stroller's wheel turned once, twice, and then silence. Then the faintest whisper of fabric. I kept running until my lungs burned and the city blurred. until I reached the safety of a packed subway car, until the ordinary faces around me seemed like a temporary miracle. That night, I locked every door and sat awake until dawn, watching the windows like a man who expects his reflection to step out and speak his name. I could hear the city breathing, indifferent and enormous. I wanted meaning. I wanted logic. Instead, I learned to listen for the hush between heartbeats. And to my left, pinned where a nail had been hammered into the plaster, a page from Harold's notebook had been slipped beneath my door. 3 words in shaky handwriting that made blood run cold in my ears. They are closer. Chapter 4. The Nesting Signs. The note from Harold had sat on my kitchen table like a hot coal I couldn't drop. 3 words. They are closer. Scrawled in a hand that trembled as if the writer had been taking his last breaths while writing them. I carried that paper around with me for a day, folding it into my wallet between the receipts I never threw away. It felt obscene to keep it, like hiding a crime scene in my pocket. Sleep became a rumor. I moved through the day with a thin, nervous energy, checking reflections, watching faces. A cashier scanning my coffee looked like a mask. The man who watered plants outside his office building had fingers that seemed too long. I cataloged the oddities like a detective who'd lost his badge. Every detail stacked into a case file in my head until there was nothing else left there but accusation. I knew I had to do something that wasn't following and peering and imagining. I had to find proof, evidence, a marker they couldn't smooth away with a smile. The first sign came at work. I work nights at the paper, layout and copy for the online edition. It's a stupid, solitary job. Most people think it keeps you connected to the city without actually being in it. That night I stayed late, not because the stories demanded it, but because the fluorescent glow of the newsroom was a poor substitute for the sun. Around 2 a.m, while the office hummed like a distant insect, I found a printout tucked under a stack of press proofs, a flyer, glossy and small, half hidden. It carried a symbol I recognized from Harold's notebooks, 3 curved lines forming a spiral with a dot at the center, as if someone had sketched an eye that never closed. My fingers tightened on the paper until it creased. The spiral wasn't decorative. Harold had circled it and written, marker. I should have brought it to the police. I should have taken it to anyone who could authenticate an act. Instead, I photographed it on my phone, uploaded the image into a hole in my memory where license plates and faces went to vanish, and then followed the trail the symbol suggested. It led me to the old Commerce Building, an abandoned tower near the river. Once a financial hub, now a place for trespassers and pigeons. I walked along the river path. The wet air smelled of rust and algae, and the tower's broken windows glinted like dark teeth against the sky. Someone had spray painted the symbol on a boarded window. Not subtle. Whoever did this wanted either to claim territory or to warn. I slipped inside through a gap in the service door, the sound of my breath too loud in the empty lobby. The elevator lobby was caged in darkness. The stairwell smelled of urine and old coffee. I climbed until my calves burned, stopping only when a faint light leaked under a heavy door on the 5th floor. Pushing it open revealed a room that was wrong in the way old houses become wrong when renters change. There were rugs layered upon rugs, chairs in circles, and candles, cheap white candles melted into little towers. A projector set on a crate. The screen rolled down. Someone had been here recently. The wax still held the shape of dripping, like the memory of a hand. On a table lay name tags, simple adhesive strips, the kind you slap on your chest at conferences. But the names on them were familiar. Council members, a local charity director, a business owner who ran a chain of deli shops downtown. All of them photographed and posted on the forum just days before, tagged as missing or replaced. Some of the pictures had been altered, eyes narrowed, skin tones shifted subtly in the shadows. I kept my head low and slid into the circle of chairs, pretending curiosity and journalistic hunger. A voice from the doorway made me start. Lost? A man stepped in, mid-40s, suit too sharp for the building, his shoes clean as if he hadn't walked through anything but marble. He had the measured air of someone used to being obeyed. When he moved, his tie didn't quite catch the light the way fabric should. It shimmered like a scale under the angle. I thought I was hallucinating. Maybe I was. My hand reached for my phone to take another picture, but the man's gaze snapped to me like a spotlight. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low and amused. The cadence of his words had a peculiar rhythm, as if certain consonants were softer than others. He smiled, and the smile registered in my chest as a cold object. "Just looking," I lied, because it was the simplest untruth. This place looked abandoned." He laughed, slow. "Abandoned places have uses." He moved closer until I could make out the sharpness in his cheekbones, the way the light skittered across his skin. Up close, I noticed a faint vertical crease at the corner of his eye that looked like the shadow of a slit pupil. A fragment of scale at his temple caught the beam of the room light, winked, and was gone. Panic made my movements clumsy. I scrambled to my feet. "I shouldn't..." The man's smile widened. "You know," he said conversationally, "people who take photographs tend to make themselves a problem." He gestured as if indicating a rule more than a threat. Behind him, the projector clicked on. The screen bloomed to life with a map. Pins dotted the city, schools, hospitals, the courthouse, each marked with the spiral symbol. The man's hand tapped one pin, then another. "Expansion," he said softly. "It has to be orderly." A slow, terrible understanding crawled through me. This wasn't random. This was a plan. The names on the table were not victims. They were placements. The people who sat in power positions across the town were not human anymore. Or maybe they had never been human in the way the rest of us understood it. "You shouldn't be here," the man repeated. This time there was no humor in it. I backed towards the door, every step a confession. The smell of candle wax filled my lungs. The man's eyes narrowed. He stretched out a hand, and when his fingers curled, they looked too long, the knuckles too pronounced, as if designed for a grip that wasn't ours. "Stay," he said, and there was a command in the word that made something in my chest clench. The circle of chairs began to stir. From the shadows, people emerged. Some in business casual, some in the plain clothes of volunteers, with faces that were almost right, but not quite. A flutter of movement at the edge of vision. A soft, almost inaudible hiss that might have been a whisper, or might have been the sound of cold wind through scales. I had one clear thought. This is how it ends. Not with a grand, apocalyptic reveal, but with people I trusted leaning in to do the bidding of whatever lurked beneath. I reached for the door, for the night, for any anonymity I had left. When I brushed my hand against the handle, a light touch stopped me, a presence at my shoulder, warm breath that smelled faintly of menthol and metal. A voice at my ear, close enough that I felt it beneath my skin, whispered, "You were warned." Then the door was pulled shut from the outside. I was not simply trapped in a room, I was in their nest. And from the darkness beyond the candlelight came the sound of many small, wet things moving, like the rustle of leaves when an animal crawls through brush. Chapter 5. The thin glass of trust. They closed the door without theatrics. No slam, no clang, just the soft, decisive silence of someone shutting away a thing that might wake. The lock clicked into place, not the kind of old lock that protests, but a precise mechanism that felt practiced and final. The room that had seemed merely wrong an hour ago now felt like a lung that had been filled with someone else's breath. The man in the suit, Marcus, the name tag on the table had read earlier, though names had lost their comforting weight, paced once, his shoes whispering on the old carpet. Around him, the circle of faces resolved from shadow into features I recognized from the city's paper, in the charity banquet programs, and the dull bylines of morning radio. Teachers, a council aide I'd seen at town meetings, the deli owner with a quick smile. Each one stepped into the light like an actor choosing a mask. "You shouldn't have come alone," Marcus said, as if stating a weather fact. His hands were not idle. They folded and unfolded, a slow, deliberate metronome. The hush of the candles amplified every small movement. I felt like an insect pinned beneath a glass slide. The world magnified and cruel. Why us? I asked, voice thin. Why? Why choose people like them? A woman at the back, someone who organized the city's volunteer drives, answered with a small laugh that had no humor. Because it's efficient, she said. Because you trust them. Her eyes glinted with a clarity that made the hair on the back of my neck prickle. When she shifted, the angle let me see the pale fringe along her jaw, tiny overlapping ridges that vanished when she crossed her hands. Her fingers, when they rested on her knee, were too still. The rational part of my brain tried to gather itself like a splintered team. If this was an organization, it had logistics. If it had logistics, it had plans. If it had plans, it had vulnerabilities. I was a reporter by trade, not a brave one, but trained to pry. The instinct kicked in. Find the weak link, follow the thread. I had no plan at all. Who are you? I asked again, the question stripped of pretense now. What do you want from Crestwood? Marcus's mouth curved as if amused. What anyone wants when they finally step out from the shadows. He paused, letting the words sit like a thread. Stability, order, control. You mean domination, I said. The word felt loud in the small room. Someone laughed, a wet, delighted sound, and it ricocheted between the walls like a loose coin. He stepped closer, and I caught the scent of him then. Not quite human, a mineral tang beneath the cologne, like the smell of riverbed stones after rain. Up close, his eyes were not entirely vertical slitted, but the dark line at the pupil's center was too precise to be natural. When he blinked, a fine membrane slid across, translucent and clinical. You could make this easier, Marcus murmured. You could join. We always need people who notice. His voice softened, persuasive syrup. You could help them understand, translate human. Never, I said before I could filter it. The word landed like a brick. There was a beat of silence and then movement, a ripple as if someone had pulled a thread through fabric. The volunteer woman standing near us let out a small, disappointed sigh. Such fire, she said almost fondly. Her fingers flexed, and I watched the angle of her wrist with new attention, searching for any sign of human weakness. The deli owner moved to block the far door with a deliberate casualness, folding his thick hands as if in prayer. That was when I noticed the thin line of blood at the corner of the council aide's mouth. It looked like a scratch, a bright red comma that broke the pale curve of his cheek. His eyes slid to me, and for a second he seemed human in the way only fear can make a face human. An honest, naked panic. He reached up as if to wipe it away, and there, like a bad picture, a scale flaked free between his fingers. Everything clicked into the schema I'd been denying. They were not merely wearing masks. They maintained a human skin by constant, quiet shedding and replacement. The name tags were not trophies, but maintenance records. The projector map had been a scheduling board. The pins were nests being tended. That's how they keep up appearances. Harold's voice echoed in my memory, nictitating membranes. Scales peeled like old wallpaper. The pieces slid together like teeth finding their socket. Panic didn't make me run. Instead, a strange, focused calm settled over me. The kind that arrives when a person knows precisely how to break a glaze with a chisel. If they tended themselves in private, there would be private spaces. Rooms like this, basements, maintenance closets, places where they repaired and replaced. If that was true, there would be evidence. Tools, scales, discarded skins. I moved when Marcus wasn't looking, bending low as if to tie my shoe, reaching for the projector table with a practiced swift motion. A heavy jar of matches sat there, its lid loose. I flicked it open, fingers surer than they had any right to be, and upended the contents near the candles. Watch him, Marcus warned. His voice had shifted. It wasn't a suggestion now, but an order. The circle tightened like a noose, a subtle closing that made my chest constrict. I struck a match, just one, the flame sudden and blinding in the dim room. The wax on the nearest candle caught, hissing like a small animal. For a moment, the light threw the faces into a grotesque clarity. Cheekbones too sharp, eyes catching light in a way no human eye should. The volunteer woman's smile widened into something that revealed too much tooth when the real shadow of her jaw slid into place. The man at the far end, counsel aide, made a movement that was more animal than man, an attempt at a lunge, but his body betrayed him. He was too human in his fear to fully transform. That single failed motion bought me a fraction of space. I threw the jar of matches with a practiced aim. It struck the projector, sending the screen lurching and the map fluttering. Papers scattered like startled birds. The circle broke its rhythm to recover the projected board. They were fast, but they were not omnipotent. Someone grabbed my arm. Hard, not maliciously, but with a force meant to redirect. The deli owner's grip was firm. His skin was warm at first, then cool as my panic spread. "You're making a mistake," he said. And for the first time, I heard an undercurrent of pleading. It trembled like a human thing. "Let go," I said, twisting. The movement forced him to shift, and a seam on his forearm split. A thin line of light like a crack in painted porcelain. A sliver of something iridescent winked through. The room erupted. Voices layered, a chorus of hisses and human syllables. People moved in a choreography of measured violence. I shoved past a chair, stumbling into the corridor, my lungs burning with the cold air that tasted like rain. Behind me, the door banged open and slotted shut, someone's foot catching the lip of the threshold. I ran down the stairwell 2 steps at a time, ignoring the pain. Footsteps answered me, rapid, efficient. The sound of them multiplied, echoing and closing. I nearly made the service door when a shadow dropped across the corridor, and a hand seized my shoulder with talon speed. The touch was the proof I'd been searching for. Not the imagined cold, but the correct reptilian texture. Dry, ridged, an engineered grip meant to hold and to break. "Stay," Marcus said behind me, and this time the word had the force of law. I wrenched free with a single animal motion and fell into the alley, lungs burning with night air. Behind me, the service door gave a long, furious groan. The city smelled like diesel and wet concrete and something else. Something like burned sugar and iron. I ran until the lights blurred, and my shoes left prints in the thin, greasy snow. I did not look back until I reached the safety of a diner that refused to be quiet, its neon a small, defiant sun. Inside, the ordinary clatter of plates and laughter washed over me like a healing. But nothing in that room fit cleanly in my memory anymore. Faces I once trusted layered over the faces in the projector room. Trust had been a thin glass. Marcus and his crew had simply lifted the frame and peered through. I dropped a stone into their water and now understood the rings it made. The next morning, my desk at the paper bore an envelope. My name was written in block letters. Inside, a single photograph. Me last night, running from the old Commerce building. The corners were slightly burned. Underneath, a single note in a hand that was not Harold's. Not entirely human in its slant. "You were warned to stop looking." Chapter 6. The Familiar Strangers. I barely slept. Every time my eyes closed, I saw scales. Every time I drifted off, I felt that dry, ridged hand closing around my shoulder again. By morning, the world outside my apartment window felt sharper, thinner, as if reality had been scraped down to its raw wires. The diner coffee still burned at the back of my throat. I hadn't even tasted it, just drained it in gulps like it was medicine. The neon sign of that place had seemed like salvation last night, but daylight stripped the illusion. The waitress who'd served me, her smile too tight, her eyes too glossy. Had she been one of them? Had she followed me? The newspaper office smelled of ink and dust, the familiar tang that usually grounded me. But the moment I stepped inside, something was off. "Rough night?" Jeff called from across the room, his usual grin plastered on. He was my colleague, the kind who whistled while he typed, who never seemed rattled. But today, when I glanced at him, the grin felt pasted on. His eyes lingered a little too long, unblinking. I tried to force a laugh. Something like that. His fingers tapped the desk in a steady rhythm. Tap, tap. Pause. tap, tap, tap. I stared longer than I should have, realizing the pattern was the same rhythm Marcus's hand had made last night. Folding and unfolding. I looked away, skin crawling. At my own desk, an unease burrowed into me. The envelope with the photograph lay in my bag, a weight I couldn't ignore. I wanted to shove it in Jeff's face, scream at him, demand to know if he'd seen anyone follow me. But the memory of that council chamber burned brighter than my paranoia. Trust no one. The editor, Mrs. Harding, shuffled in a half hour later. She'd been in the business 30 years, hair always pulled into the same gray bun, glasses dangling from a chain. She was steady, a rock. But when she set her purse on the table, a small slip of something pale green fluttered out. Thin, translucent, curved like parchment. A scale. I froze. My throat tightened. She noticed me watching and quickly brushed it into her palm, tucking it away with a too-casual smile. "Oh, paper's running late," she said briskly. "We'll need that piece on the waterboard vote by tonight." Her voice was the same, but I swore I heard the faintest hiss underneath the words. I couldn't write. My hands hovered uselessly over the keyboard. Every sound in the office, the scratching of pens, the squeak of chairs, the tapping of keys, felt staged, like they were imitating normal. I bolted at lunch. The streets didn't help. The busker outside the pharmacy who strummed the same 3 chords day after day. Today his fingers lingered on a note too long, his head tilting unnaturally still as I passed. The old man who fed pigeons near the park bench, his pigeons weren't there. He just sat, staring at me, a crumb crumbling endlessly between his fingers. Even home wasn't safe. My sister called in the evening, cheerful as always. "You sound tired," she said. "Yeah, long week." She laughed lightly. "Don't worry, you'll adjust. Everyone does." The words stopped me cold. "Adjust to what?" I asked. Silence stretched on the line. Then her voice returned, too quick, too smooth. "I mean, to work, to the schedule." But her voice carried something else, something rehearsed. I didn't realize I was crying until I saw the wet streaks on my hands. My own sister, my only real family, was slipping from me, her voice carrying the echo of theirs. I ended the call. I didn't answer when she rang again. That night, I pushed a chair against the door, sat in the dark with a baseball bat across my lap, and listened. Every creak of the apartment, every passing car, every whisper of wind against the windows sounded like breathing, like scales brushing drywall. Somewhere outside in the street below, I heard a low, deliberate hiss, and then a voice I knew. Jeff's voice. "You can't hide forever." Chapter 7. Breaking the Nest. Fear had a way of turning into something else after a while, into a map. Once the immediate panic passed, the edges of the world sharpened. I could see roads now, weak seams where their substitution left a pattern. Meetings that always happened on Thursdays, certain civic events where the same faces sat in the same order, maintenance crews that worked odd hours. Patterns meant schedules, and schedules meant vulnerability. Harold's notebooks were a Bible I'd been skimming in fits and starts. He'd marked the municipal calendar with red X's and messy arrows. Waterboard third Thurs, library basement, ventilation access, old mill deliveries, night. I started to copy his handwriting into my own notebook, the words acting like stakes I could drive into the ground to anchor myself. If they had nests, rooms where they repaired their skin, their hides, I needed one. If I could find a nest and get proof, one scale, one recording, I could either expose them or at least arm myself with something that felt like a weapon. The old mill had been where I'd seen the woman with the stroller. It also had a delivery schedule Harold had circled months ago. That night, wearing a hood and taking my furtive practice route, I slipped through a service gate and found a side door that was propped open with a cracked wooden pallet. The river air tasted of rust and old rain. My flashlight carved a narrow, trembling corridor through the dark. The nest was not dramatic. It was a room tucked between 2 storage bays, curtained off with plastic sheeting and lit by a single dangling bulb. Blankets were stacked in one corner, plastic tubs lined a shelf. On a table lay things that made my stomach churn. Jars of what looked like slick preservative, a box of surgical gloves, a stack of old prosthetic adhesives. A lamp burned low, making the wet surfaces glint. And there, spread like a fan on a tin tray, were discarded scales. They were smaller than I imagined, curved like fingernails, iridescent with depth. Up close, they were not colorful in a pretty way. They looked like the inside of a shell, made of something tough and cold. When I reached out my hand, the nearest scale was warm, as if it had been recently removed. I wrapped a glove on my hand and picked one up, cradling it like a monster's coin. It fit my palm and phone read, get the scale, get a sample of the preservative, record the room. Proof, proof, proof. A sound made me drop the scale back into the tray. A soft, practiced hiss, the kind that could be a conversation or the settling of breath. The plastic sheeting at the edge of the room shifted. Not the first, a voice said, amused and dry. I froze. A figure stepped from the shadows, small and angular, wearing an old shipping jacket. Up close, I could see the seams, fine lines along the jaw, a faint ridge where the ear met the skin. He was not in the gala of Marcus's circle. He had the look of someone who kept to the edges and mended things. You shouldn't be here, he said, but the words were not a threat, so much as a weary observation. Neither should you, I snapped before I could help it. The bravado sounded thinner than I meant. He laughed, a dry sound that turned on itself. Fair enough. He stepped closer and held out a hand. There in the dim bulb, his fingers caught the light and, horrible relief, were human. No scale, no ridge. He smelled faintly of oil and cigarette smoke. You're not like the others, I said, because I needed to know. No, he admitted, not anymore. His voice softened. Name's Thomas. Used to work the docks. Got in too close. He glanced at the tray and then at me. You find something? I swallowed. Yes, I produced the glove and the scale. Careful, like a thief with contraband. I have proof. Thomas's eyes didn't widen, as I expected. Instead, he seemed to look through the scale at something else. Proof is a story people must want to hear, he said, and most people prefer their blankets. We can make them listen, I said, surprising myself with the force in my voice. Councilman faces on a table, scales and jars, recordings. We can blow the roof off this. Thomas's jaw tightened. You think Marcus will sit still for that? He shook his head. They don't have to. You bring a torch into their nest and you become the story. You'll be the one who burned. Then we don't go loud, I said. We go surgical. We leak anonymously. Papers, forums, one trusted reporter with a backbone. I thought of Harold's dead eyes. I couldn't bear the idea of another notebook left folded open to rot. Thomas's shoulders sagged a little. There are layers, he said. Not all of them agree. Some are older, set in their ways. Others want to change. Marcus is consolidation. He wants control, not secrecy. Can you help me? The question came out raw. He hesitated. I can give you a list. I can give you times and names and entry points. I can show you how to get in and get out, but I can't stand in the light with you. I paid for that once. I thought of Harold, of the funeral that had been a formality. What do you want? Thomas looked at me the way someone looks at a worn coin and decides whether it's worth saving. One thing, he said it quietly. Get me out when it happens, if it happens. I don't want to be the one left behind when they tidy this town. We made plans in whispers over rusting crates, the kind of arrangements men make when they cross lines they can't return from. Thomas handed me a paper, names crossed and retraced, an access schedule, a floor plan of the municipal building, with an X marked in the basement where utilities and, more importantly, maintenance access connected 3 city departments. You want the truth? He said as he folded the paper and tucked it into my jacket. Start in the basement. Follow the pipes. Nobody looks there. I left the old mill with a scale tucked into my shoe and a weight in my chest. For the first time since Harold, I had an ally. Someone who had one foot in their world and one out. That sliver of help felt as dangerous and as precious as a match. As I walked back through the night toward the part of town where houses sat like quiet teeth, I kept checking over my shoulder. Thomas had said Marcus would not tolerate exposure. The word would felt like a promise. When I reached my stoop, the streetlight flickered. A noise at the end of the block. A car idling where no car should be. I slowed. A figure stepped out beneath the light and turned toward me, silhouetted. It raised a hand in a slow, casual wave, one I recognized too well. Marcus, Chapter 8, The City Beneath. The wave wasn't a greeting, it was ownership. Marcus stood beneath the streetlight like it had been designed to frame him, his silhouette crisp, unmoving. My first instinct was to run back to Tom's at the old mill, but the street between us was an open artery. I forced myself to keep walking, head down, key in hand, like I was just another tired resident, ending another tired day. The lock turned with a merciful click. I slipped inside my apartment, shut the door softly, and pressed my back to it, chest heaving. My curtains had been drawn, but I knew he was still outside, listening, cataloging. Their patience was worse than any chase. They could wait longer than I could breathe. I didn't sleep. By dawn, I was moving. Thomas's notes burned in my pocket. The municipal building basement, pipes, access corridors, things no citizen cared about. If Marcus had shown himself so openly, it meant they felt untouchable, or it meant I was already caught in their game. Either way, I couldn't stop. The municipal building looked ordinary enough in daylight. Beige bricks, a flag stirring half-heartedly in the wind. City clerks in cardigans fumbling with coffee cups. Inside, the lobby buzzed with the usual monotony. Residents complaining about permits, security guards scanning badges. And so, I flashed my old press badge, long expired, and gave a nod of confidence I didn't feel. The guard barely looked at it. His eyes were glazed, his smile brittle. I wondered if he'd even know if the lamination peeled to reveal nothing at all. Thomas's map led me down 2 flights of stairs, past authorized personnel-only signs. The air grew damp, metallic. The fluorescent bulbs here flickered, a sick rhythm that buzzed in my teeth. I counted pipes, traced their convergence. And then I found it. A steel door, paint flaking, padlock gleaming newer than everything else around it. No placard, no number, just humming, low and constant, like a generator buried deep. I pressed my ear to the cold metal. The hum wasn't mechanical. It pulsed, organic, like the vibration of a throat. Inside, the room was colder. My flashlight beams swept across stacked crates, plastic sheeting, rows of folding chairs arranged in a half circle. And on the wall, dear God, the wall was alive. Sheets of translucent skin hung like laundry, each one pinned carefully. Some were child-sized, some larger. They fluttered in the faint draft like obscene flags. Beneath them, tubs bubbled with clear gel, scales suspended like coins in resin. It wasn't a storage room. It was a hatchery. Voices drifted from a side passage, 2, maybe 3. I killed the light and ducked behind a crate, pulse hammering. Rotation is set. Harding will cover Thursday. The boy at the register, Friday. Harding. My editor. My chest seized. They weren't just replacing officials. They were filtering through every rung of life. Teachers, clerks, children. Building a city where every friendly nod hit a forked tongue. One of them stepped into view, adjusting a collar, muttering in irritation. For an instant, the human mask shimmered under the flicker of the bulbs, and I saw the scale jaw underneath, slick and perfect. He reached into a tub and plucked out a scale, pressing it to his cheek like a man reapplying a bandage. I gripped the baseball bat tighter. One swing, I thought. One swing and I could shatter his skull and run, but the second figure followed, carrying a clipboard, humming in that inhuman cadence. My arm went slack. There were too many, and if I killed one, I'd only proved Marcus right, that I was already theirs to watch, to play with. I backed out slowly, careful with every breath. The door closed with a soft sigh behind me. My knees nearly gave out on the stairwell, but adrenaline pushed me onward. I had the footage. My phone's lens had caught it all. The skins, the tubs, the scales being pressed into place. This was the story Harold had died for. Proof. Back in my apartment, I locked every bolt and played the video over and over. Each frame was a nightmare, but also salvation. The world needed to see it. If the city paper wouldn't run it, there were other outlets, blogs, forums. Somewhere it would spread. But as I reached for my laptop, a knock echoed through the apartment. 3 sharp raps. I froze. Another knock, this time softer. "Open up," a voice said. My sister's voice. Except she wasn't supposed to be here. She lived 2 hours away. "Please," she said, voice breaking. "It's me. Let me in." I stared at the door until my vision blurred. My phone buzzed in my hand, and when I looked down, her name was on the screen. "She's calling me, and she's at the door." The rapping grew louder, more insistent, until the wood rattled in its frame. And beneath her voice, I heard it, the faint, unmistakable hiss. Chapter 9. The broadcast and the trap. I decided to go loud. For weeks I'd crawled through the seams of the city, whispering to forums and slipping notes under doors. It had kept me alive. It had not moved a thing. The nests were soothed, the schedules adjusted, the pins on Marcus's map rearranged like chess pieces. If secrecy was their strength, sunlight had to be the solvent. I packed the scale in a Ziploc and transferred the video to 3 different drives. I wrote an email to every outlet I could think of and attached the files. Most bounced back with automated niceties. One local talk show host, call-in politics fodder, with an audience that liked a scandal with its morning coffee, answered my direct message. He was crass, hungry for clicks, and loved a good conspiracy. He agreed to let me on air anonymously that afternoon. And the plan was stupid and elegant. I'd play the video live, cut to the raw footage, let the visuals and the sound do what my words could not. If they tried to scrub it after the fact, at least the broadcast would have been made. At worst, I'd be blocked and laughed at. At best, the city would wake up. I sat in my car outside the station, the engine off, my hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee, gone cold. The drive recorded on my dash cam, a small redundance. Harold's lessons had taught me redundancy. Thomas's note with the maintenance map was folded in my pocket like a talisman. When I entered the studio, the host, Clark, gave me the kind of grin reserved for men who traded in spectacle. "You sound like you've got dirt," he said, hand on my shoulder like a man putting a coin on a table. "We'll go live in 60 seconds. The control room hummed with a dozen people, faces lit by monitors. The red live sign glowed like an omen. I rolled my thumb over the scale in my jacket for steadiness. Clark cued me. "You ready? Mix hot." I played the first clip. At first it was as I'd recorded it. The tubs, the skins, the scale being pressed into place like a cosmetic. The control room grew quiet. Then something flickered at the edge of the footage. An edit I hadn't made. The image jolted, and for a single second, a different clip bled over. Me, alone in a dark stairwell, ripping down a poster, smashing a window. Acts of vandalism I had not committed. The host laughed. Nervous relief like a man told the joke was on him. "Well, that's crazy," he said. In the control room, monitors shifted and voices rose. "Weird feed," someone muttered. "Source corrupted." I yanked my thumb over the cable connector. It was snug. My drives were sealed. I watched the screens as if they were suddenly breathing. The footage stuttered, then smoothed, and when it returned, it bore a new weight. A montage of me framed as a lunatic activist, smearing vitriol, an angry vandal, a man lashing out. My footage had been edited into a narrative where I was the villain. The hosts, handsome men who thrived on controversy, did what broadcasters do. They spun the story into spectacle. "Another conspiracy kook," Clark said, and the audience line lit up with derisive comments. Panic cost me time. When I protested, they smiled like people who'd seen this trick before. "You don't have to shout," Clark said. "We've got it." The live feed moved on. Within minutes, the station's site was plastered with headlines. Local crackpot blames officials for imaginary nests. The video that mattered, the unadulterated one, had been overwritten in the broadcast chain. Someone had swapped the feed at source. Someone in the control room had hands in their pockets, the way Marcus had. Steady, accustomed. I left the studio with my throat raw and a new certainty. They controlled signals. Cameras, servers, even the small, fearless hands of radio hosts. If Thomas was right about layers, this was a top layer. I went home to find my sister waiting on the stoop, eyes wet, hair damp from a city drizzle. Relief washed through me so hard I nearly stumbled. She reached for me like a child and I let her, until I noticed the angle of her fingers, the way her wrist flexed. Her smile didn't curve. It held. "Why did you do this?" she whispered. My name was accusation and familiarity, and the last safe thing I'd expect to hear. "What? What do you mean?" My words were clumsy. "Why broadcast attacks?" Her voice had a thrum beneath it, a tune that didn't fit her. Before I could answer, the streetlights around us winked, and a car blocked the road. Marcus stepped out, as composed as if the city were a stage and he, its director. He looked at my sister and then at me with an indulgent smile. "Too theatrical," he said, almost disappointed. "We prefer calm efficiency." Thomas's warning, "Don't be the story," had been a prophecy. My broadcast made me the story. Marcus's men closed in gently. Hands, human and not, took my arms. I didn't resist. Resistance would only give them a reason to hurt. They led me to a van smelling of disinfectant and copper. In the back, beneath a dim, clinical light, a small table waited. On it, instruments gleamed like promises and threats. "You could have been useful," Marcus said, standing over me, his shadow precise. "You still might be." The scale in my pocket felt heavy as a confession. I thought of Harold's notebooks, Thomas's cautions, the thousands of small choices that had framed this life. I thought of the city, of the faces I trusted, now folded into a map I couldn't unsee. They didn't make me watch long. The van moved, tires swallowing pavement. And what I saw through the slatted grate as we pulled away was the city moving on. People blocking sidewalks, laughing into phones. Utterly ordinary. The world had not shifted because I'd shouted into a microphone. It had simply rearranged me. As the van turned down a corridor lined with concrete and steel, one small, human gesture broke the calm. Thomas appeared in the doorway of an open loading bay, a silhouette against the river light. He made a movement, small and precise, before the van's doors closed. He raised his hand and for a blink he mouthed a single, broken thing. "Run." They must have seen him. The van's interior was loud with the hum of the engine and something else, soft like the shift of scales. My hands were cuffed, but my mind had a sliver of time to plan. When the door slammed shut, it wasn't just iron. It felt like the last safe place had locked away the possibility of rescue. I thought of Harold, of the note under my door. "They are closer." I tried to make it into a direction instead of a threat. The van pitch black, the hum deep and steady, and over the sound of the wheels, the smallest, newest sound threaded through. Something like the click of a camera, a shutter, a soft breath that might have been a tongue. Chapter 10. The Last Light. The van took me where the city forgot to look. Concrete swallowed the sound of the engine until we were a single iron heartbeat moving through the belly of the place. The air in the back was cold, antiseptic, the kind of chill that numbs more than it cleanses. My hands were cuffed tight. The metal bit into my wrists until white crescents bloomed. Outside, the world was ordinary. Windows lit, a dog barking somewhere, the indifferent hum of life. Inside, everything had been sterilized of mercy. They led me into a room that smelt of boiled metal. Fluorescent strips hummed overhead. A table stood center, clinical and small, like an altar. Instruments lay on a stainless tray. Clamps, filaments, a long, thin hook that caught the light and turned it hungry. Marcus sat like a judge. He had a hand on the small of my back and a smile that could have been made of ice. "Quiet," he said, and there was that strange cadence again. the way his voice curved around words like velvet on a bone. A man I'd seen once in a grocery aisle, the sideways blink, that nictitating membrane, stood at the foot of the table. He picked up the scale I'd brought, turning it between two fingers with the reverence of a jeweler. "You gave us quite a show," he observed. "So theatrical." I tried to speak. The cuff at my wrist chafed. My mouth tasted of copper and stale coffee. "You can't," I started. "People will." "They will not," Marcus said simply. "They will keep their lives. They will continue to be content." He tapped the scale against his palm. "You panic at the idea of our order. You confuse order with evil." Thomas's silhouette moved in the doorway like a bad memory. He stood framed by river light, one shoulder dipped, hands tucked in a jacket. For a second, one small, impossible second, hope bloomed hot and bright in my chest. He had warned me. He had promised me a plan. Then two figures came from the corridor and took him. Quick, efficient hands closed around his arms, and the light left his face like someone had snuffed a candle. He looked at me, eyes wide, apology folded into the set of his jaw, and mouthed a single word I could not be sure I heard. "Run." They dragged him away before I could move. They did not make the procedure theatrical. There was no speech, no declaration. Marcus called it maintenance, the necessary tending of a city's caretakers. They sedated me with something that smelled faintly of cloves and iron. The world swam and narrowed until it was only sensation and small, clinical noises. When I woke, my head throbbed and my arms were slick with a pale warmth. I tried to move and a pressure kept me pinned. Restraints, yes, but also sheets that clung like wet skin. A small mirror leaned against the wall where a nurse might have set it. I blinked at my face. For a moment, I thought at the light. My pupils were too narrow. Not the sandy, frightened pinholes of fear, but vertical slits. Thin, exact. I blinked and the membrane flicked across on its own. A reflex I did not command. My throat tightened. I touched my face with shaky fingers. The skin felt right, familiar. But under the knuckle where my wrist creased, something glinted. A pale, iridescent line beneath the skin, like a seam. The room tilted. A soft footfall approached. Marcus did not look surprised at my reaction. If anything, he seemed pleased. "They alter slowly," he said. "So when the city changes, the people accept the new pattern without waking." He nodded toward a monitor that showed feeds from other rooms. Faces I recognized in them. Editors, teachers. My sister at the counter of a grocery store, smiling with a hollow I had seen before. Some become what they are. Some remain who they want to be for a time. "Why me?" I croaked. "What do you want from me?" Marcus smiled that patient smile. "You were loud," he said. "You were messy. You were a hazard. People like you stir the water." He leaned in close enough that I could see the fine membrane sliding across his eye. "We could make you useful if you'd accept a different life." Acceptance, as they meant it, was not a choice. It was a slow, surgical dismantling of the human parts you considered immutable. They took tissue, grafted membranes, sutured like a tailor making a new suit. Each step was clinical and exact, and each stitch felt like erasing a part of me. They promised a painless process. They lied. Pain came and sank like a nail. In the middle of it, through the haze of drugs and the after image of harsh light, a hand slid into mine. Thomas, he had not been taken wholly. He stood with a ragged hole missing from his sleeve where someone had tried to pull him back, and there was blood feathering through the cloth. He met my eyes and whispered, breath ragged, "I kept a way out. When they change you, there's a marker, a stitch only we can trace." "How?" I managed. "Follow the seam," he said. "There's a place in the basement by the pipes, a crawl space. Not all of them. Some keep to the rhythm. You'll see the thread." His voice faded as if he'd been drained. The hands that held mine tightened like a promise and then released. He was gone. Whether they took him or he left intentionally, I never knew. They worked until the night grew old. When they were done, my reflection was a stranger. The slits in my pupils were narrower, practiced. The membrane shivered when I blinked. My hands bared a thin ridge along the thumb where a seam had been sewn. Thomas had been right. There was a trace, a line beneath the skin, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. They released me back into the city with a folder of my photos and drives in their hands. My evidence confiscated, my voice muffled. Marcus stood in the street and watched me go like a gardener watching a plant heat pruned. I stumbled into the night and moved like a man and given back to himself. The city glowed normal and cruel. I wanted to scream, to shout the truth to anyone who would listen. But the broadcast had already told a different tale, a madman's fantasy. My own images had been spun into fiction. Who would believe a man who now reflected features of the thing he accused? At the pipes in the municipal basement, Thomas's map burned in my mind. I found the crawl space, a thin gap, a greasy path, an odor like old coins. I followed it, body tight with the ache of stitches, fingers raw, eyes half slitted as if the world needed a different aperture. My hand found the thread Thomas had mentioned, an almost invisible filament woven into the concrete seams. It glowed faintly when I brushed it, like a hair of moonlight. I pulled. The seam came free to reveal a narrow maintenance shaft with a ladder down, and at the bottom, tucked behind a rusted grate, a crate. Inside was the kind of thing that makes a man feel both foolish and saved. A phone, a drive, a notebook. Harold's handwriting across the inside cover. A note in Thomas's hand. Only one stitch remains. Cut it and run, if you can. I hesitated. My chest felt like a fist. Above me, the hum of the city moved on. Somewhere, my sister laughed at the grocery counter with the same hollow warmth she'd used on the phone weeks ago. People lived, breathed, loved, unaware of the mechanics of control behind the curtains. I thought of Harold, of Thomas, of the old man's shaky hand. I thought of Marcus's measured voice and the way the membrane slid across his eye like silk. I thought of the man in the grocery aisle that first night, and the way the world had cracked then, small and precise. I cut the stitch. It was not dramatic. It was a paper thing, metal blades and a ribbon of fiber, and when it separated, the sensation that ran through me was at once a small grief and a cold, bright clarity. The seam under my skin did not vanish, but it loosened, as if a knot had been undone and something could stir beneath the surface. I crawled out into the night and ran until my lungs burned and my legs wanted to give out. I did not stop until the neon of the diner bled into sight, until faces I did not recognize looked up and down at me like strangers assessing a man in a costume. I lived on the run after that. Thomas's crate gave me channels, emails, encrypted posts, a handful of people who still treasured truth enough to risk a sliver of light. We fed pieces out like vitamins, tiny enough to be ignored when the machine noticed, broad enough to keep the memory of resistance from dying. We were not a revolution. We were a splinter. Months blurred. Sometimes I slept. Sometimes I dreamt of scales and mornings without them. My eyes adjusted. The slit pupil remained, a narrow, private thing that made the world seem sharper at night. Sometimes when I caught myself in a window, I thought I saw a suggestion of something behind the iris, a glint that could be a mirror or a trap. Once in a grocery aisle, I watched a man in a suit blink sideways. My stomach clenched with the familiar terror. But then he looked at me, really looked, and for a second there was recognition, a small human flash. He lifted a hand. It was a wave or a warning. I returned it, and the motion felt like answering a bell. We had not won. They maintained their nests, their schedules, their folding of the world. But the seam under my skin had been loosened, and where there had been certainty, there was now a choice. Ugly, difficult, and raw. That choice was enough. I kept the scale. I wrapped it in cloth and put it in a drawer that no one opened. On bad nights, when the membrane fluttered of its own accord, I would take it out and hold the cool, hard thing until the urge to surrender passed. In the end, the city kept its face. The rings expanded and calmed and glittered like a pond of oil. We were a few lights under the surface, hidden, persistent, faint as reflected stars. And sometimes when I stared hard at my own eyes in the window of a passing car, I would see not a monster and not a man, but something between. A creature stitched into a human story, choosing which parts to keep and which parts to fight for.